Hello you guys, it's Grace, and today I'm going to be talking about my MFA reading list. Basically, the purpose of a reading list is to follow kind of a set list of books and kind of explore the craft and implement that into your own writing. So in this video, I'm not going to go super in detail about each of the books and their premise, but I kind of want to touch on like why I'm reading these particular books. I have to read greater than or equal to 30 books in my genre. So my genre is fiction, so I'm reading 30 plus fiction books. I have to read 5 books that are craft related and 5 books that are from other genres. The goal is to study your genre mainly and, utilize what you learn to become a better writer, but also to kind of get out of your comfort zone and explore some other genres as well. We were given a curated list of books, and then we were kind of allowed to swap things out and play around with it as we will. So you'll see in my list, I have a lot of like YA, I have some literary fiction, some like romance. Basically, I chose things to read that are similar to what I want to write. So like whether that's the tone, whether it's the subject matter, it's just things in the books that I'm reading that I want to aspire to be as a writer. And I also did leave some of the stock list books on there as well. I should stop blabbing and jump into talking about the books on my reading list. So first things first, I wanted to dive deeper into some of Sally Rooney's books. I freaking loved all 3 of these books. With Sally Rooney, I really wanted to kind of focus on telling a real life story and how to like jump through time and talk about like what might be a mundane thing in a beautiful way. Next up, we have A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan. This is essentially a collection of short stories, but they all kind of surround the same cast of characters. So I ended up really enjoying it, surprisingly, because usually I don't like collections of stories because I feel pretty detached from the characters and from the plots. But this one felt like short stories in novel form. Next up, we have A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. This one I read a while ago, and I think this one I mainly wanted to focus on the elements that are developing a huge world. That world building that George R.R. Martin does is absolutely insane, and following that many characters in a single book is just wild. Next up, we have Bridge of Clay by Marcus Zusak. This is another one that I already read, again focusing on like character development and like following a group of characters throughout a period of their life. Then we have Bunny by Mona Awad. This one was like so weird, and I mean that in the best way possible. I like compliments to this book for being kind of weird. The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This one is just kind of one of those like magical whimsical things, and while it isn't like high fantasy or very like super fantasy like I typically write, I think there's a lot that you can learn from these stories that are kind of just like the more like whimsy magic kind of vibe. Then we have Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. But yeah, it's a collection of 4 short stories, and again I wanted to kind of focus on reading a book that would allow me to like realize how they're developing characters in such a short period of time. And again, this one did follow the same cast of characters, so it did feel very novel-like. All right, next up we have the Emily Henry Squad, minus the newest book. But we have People We Meet on Vacation, Book Lovers, and Beach Read. Like, I wanted to focus on developing like a romance in a believable and not cringy way, because I do really appreciate how Emily Henry writes romance, and I think I had a lot to learn from her. Next up, we have The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This one, again, like focusing on myths and kind of retellings, that kind of stuff, how to stay true to what people have already heard about a subject, especially something like mythology, where there are so many different stories that are coming to the front, and turning that into your own unique story. Next up, we have On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. It was just so beautifully written. It was like the most poetic novel I think I've ever read. Every line just felt like it was so meticulously crafted, and I loved it. Next up, we have A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. The main focus of reading this one was following a few characters over a long period of their life. I love that aspect of literary fiction, that a lot of times it does follow a character or a group of characters through a long period of time. So you have a lot of time to get to know the characters and to really like grow attached to them, and that's exactly what happened in this book. Then we have Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This one, again, it's kind of following characters through a long period of time. This one has like flashbacks where it goes back into when like the parents of the main characters were like young and first meeting, and then also the characters themselves, the kids, and how they're like growing up and where they're at in their lives. The next book on my list is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. It's been a while since I read it, so I plan on rereading it and really picking apart like what I specifically liked about it. I was never able to specifically put my finger on why I loved this book so much, so that's why I want to reread it for my reading list. The next book is another one I plan on rereading. I read it a couple years ago, and that's No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai. This one was another book that, like, while I was reading it, I was like, why am I so disgusted and hate this character, but at the same time relate to him and want to protect him and love him? Like, it was such a weird flip-flop of emotions, and I really want to reread this, annotate it, and figure out what specifically drew me to this book and to this character. Okay, now we're moving on to books within my genre that I haven't read yet, so I'm gonna not really talk a whole lot about them. The Setting Sun, also by Osamu Dazai. Again, I liked the other book, so I wanted to explore this one. Then we have The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. I might be pronouncing that wrong. This one I've heard is kind of like dark academia vibes, and also kind of mystery and murder, and it just sounds like a good time and something slightly different from what I normally read. Then we have Afterlife by Julia Alvarez. I think it's a really important one that I'd like to read, so I added it to my reading list. Next up, we have A Very Large Expanse of Sea by Tahira Mafi. This one, again, kind of explores like young love and also identity, and those are things that I want to write about in my own writing, so I thought it was important to add to the reading list as well. Next up, we have Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. This one, the first sentence of the synopsis. Set in Constantinople in the 15th century, in a small town in present-day Idaho, and on an interstellar ship decades from now. Book. It just sounds like it's all over the place, but in the best way possible. Next, we have Homeland Elegies by Ayad Akhtar. This is another one deeply focused on identity and belonging and all that good stuff. Next up, we have a couple more Taylor Jenkins Reid books. These ones I haven't read yet. So we have The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and Daisy Jones and the Six. I think reading books that are popular in the time that you are actively hoping to publish work is important, because then you're seeing like what your audience is interested in and trying to cater your own writing to match audience expectations and desires. Next up, we have The Night Watchman by Louise Erdrich. This is one that is set, I think, in like the 1950s. It really intrigued me how to write about a time period that you may not have lived in, and how to like make something seem historically accurate, even if it's still fiction. Next up, we have Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu. This one, from everyone who's talked about it, has said that it has like this wonderful sense of humor about it. And as someone who sometimes feels like my humor comes across forced in my own writing, I was really curious about how it was portrayed in a novel like this. Next up, we have two books by Kazuo Ishiguro. We have Never Let Me Go and Clara and the Sun. I don't actually know a ton about these, but I've heard really great things about this author, and I was really interested to try out a couple books by him. Then we have Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This was also described as kind of dark academia vibes. It also just sounds like pretty epic and a little bit spooky. My next two are Orlando by Virginia Woolf. This was just a classic that I wanted to read. I decided on my reading list I wanted to read at least one Virginia Woolf book, so that's the one I went with. And then my last one is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. Yeah, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about those. For the craft books I decided to read, I kept 3 of them from the original list, and I added 2 of my own. One that I added is On Writing by Stephen King. This is a book that I read when I was younger, and I remember being absolutely fascinated by it, but I also knew nothing about writing or publishing or anything like that. So I basically just highlighted anything that I was like, ah yes, this is the key to success. The other one that I chose was To Show and to Tell by Philip Lopate. I read part of it in one of my undergrad creative writing classes, and I remembered really enjoying the writing style and some of the craft discussions in it, so I wanted to read that whole book. And then the other three are all books that were on the stock list. We have Bird by Anne Lamott. I've read a lot of stuff by her. I love Shitty First Drafts. That is one of my favorite essays ever. It makes writing feel so much more approachable. I share it in my English 101 class that I teach, and my students all tell me like it's one of their favorite things that we read all year too. So I think she just has such a wonderful writing style that's just so inviting. Then we have Craft in the Real World by Matt Salaces. This one we've talked about so much in my MFA program that I feel like I have to read it at this point. And then finally we have A Swim in a Pond in the Rain by George Saunders. George Saunders is just like so well known and amazing, so I felt like I had to read something by him as well. And then finally we have my 5 other genre pieces, because I think there's a lot you can learn from every single genre. So I chose 2 from poetry. We have Time as a Mother by Ocean Vuong. Since I really enjoyed the novel I read by this author, I decided I would love to compare that to the poetry as well. And then I also am going to read Ariel by Sylvia Plath. I am currently reading I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. So this is a memoir. Memoir is really interesting because obviously you don't remember every single little thing that happened to you when you were young, but you have to talk about when you were young. So it's interesting to kind of like walk that line between truth and also like a truthful retelling of the past. Then we have Tell It Slant by Brenda Miller. This is a nonfiction craft book. And then finally, we have Nobody Knows My Name by James Baldwin. This is an essay. That is it for my MFA reading list. So far, I've read 16 books out of 40. I definitely need to kind of ramp it up because I know as I'm working on my thesis, things are going to get really crazy. If you guys want me to talk more about my MFA experience, whether that's like graduation requirements or books I'm reading, or even like talking about what my experience was like getting into an MFA program or like finding a program that I liked, any of that stuff, make like a little MFA series on here. I don't know. I also plan on talking about each of the books that I read and kind of just talk a little more in detail about why I enjoyed reading that book and what I felt like I took away from it for my MFA and my own writing goals. That is it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please like it if you did. Comment below what things you would like to see from me in the future, and subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you get notified whenever I upload a new video. I'll see you next time. Bye!